Welcome to Wider View, the program that provides perspectives on the news outside the narrow confines of the mainstream media. I'm your host, Charles Dunaway. I get asked one question over and over. Why did 63 million Americans vote for Donald Trump in 2016? Many Democrats would have us believe that these people are stupid, uninformed, deplorable, sexist, and racist. And while that answer satisfies the Democratic Party leadership because it deflects attention from their own failures, some progressives, Norman Solomon for example, did an autopsy of the results, but the party establishment ignored it in favor of narratives about Russian interference and Hillary Clinton's gender. I thought I would try to answer that question in today's episode. Not from the usual pundits, but from the voters themselves. I'm not attempting to list all the reasons, but I want to highlight three that come up repeatedly when reporters talk to voters. You will hear from Michigan voters interviewed by USA Today in the weeks before the 2016 election. I think it's important you hear it from the source. So here are the three main reasons I want to discuss today about why people voted for Trump in 2016. Number one, Trump is an outsider, not another status quo politician. Number two, anxiety about change leads people to want to defend their way of life, and Trump played into that. Number three, the economy is not working for the average American, and Trump acknowledged that fact and promised to fix it. So here are a few of those Michigan voters.
He's not a politician in the strictest sense of the word. He doesn't owe anybody anything after the election. So I think he'll have at least a chance to accomplish something.
And I love the fact that of all the candidates, Republican and Democrat, he came on and he was rude, he was vulgar. He got his point right across, but he did not do it in a nice, friendly way. And I think we've had too many politicians that are nice and fluffy. I want somebody who will say, nah, you take that and shove it where the sun doesn't shine.
What appeals to me about Donald Trump is that he's an outsider. I'm sick of the all talk, no action politicians. I felt like the last two elections, my vote didn't count. I voted for John McCain, I voted for Mitt Romney, and we lost. And I thought that, especially with Mitt Romney, that it was an election that should have been won. So I finally feel like we have somebody who has credentials outside of Washington.
What appeals to me about my chosen candidate, Donald Trump, is the fact that he's not part of the political system.
U.S. voters have consistently voted for someone they view as outside the Washington, D.C. establishment. We've elected a peanut farmer from Georgia, a movie actor from California, a governor of Arkansas, a governor of Texas, and then a first-term African-American senator from Illinois. They're trying to tell us something, and the establishment didn't listen. So by voting for Trump, they've told the power elites in the strongest possible language that they don't want status quo politics. The only conclusion you can really draw from the preference for outsiders is that many people in the U.S. believe their government is not meeting their needs, is not responding to them, has been captured by the bi-coastal corporate elites. Well, all those assessments are true. A recent Princeton study proved that policy is usually made in response to the highest level of the wealth and income scale. What working people want is irrelevant. Now and then an outsider comes in and disrupts the party's plans, like Jimmy Carter in 1976 or Donald Trump in 2016. But more often, the outsider is either already committed to the establishment or is quickly overtaken by the insiders, Obama being a recent example. George Packer, writing in The Atlantic, noted Washington's failures as a corrupt political class, a sclerotic bureaucracy, a heartless economy, and a divided and distracted public. Many in this country see all politicians as crooks, responsive to their donors, or as I would call them, bribers, and are more interested in their political careers than the good of the country. The federal bureaucracy, after 4 decades of budget cuts and privatization, is far less efficient than it once was. The neoliberal economic policy that both parties support has resulted in more financial precarity for working people and unimaginable wealth for the top 1%. These problems are not hidden. Everyone knows about them, including opposition party politicians in Washington, but nothing is done about them. Hillary Clinton said America is already great and we just need to keep on doing as we are. And Joe Biden has said that if he's elected, nothing will fundamentally change. Both Clinton and Biden have public positions that are very different from what they tell their donors and the Wall Street titans behind closed doors. Both of them are members in good standing of the Washington establishment that has presided over the destruction of the American dream. Is it any wonder that millions of people want an outsider? Jędrzej Mitrowski wrote in the European Strategist, quote, "After the decades when U.S. president after U.S. president pursued the same liberal policies and they did not work, surely the best course in politics is to try out an alternative," end quote. Well, Trump provided those voters an alternative. The Democrats did not. I think that few would argue that Trump has successfully resisted the D.C. establishment, but as with so much in politics, it's the perception created by the media that counts, not the facts. The right-wing media will tell you that Trump has been opposed by the deep state since day one, persecuted by the FBI, the Mueller team, and the Democrats through their impeachment folly. They would say he's resisted by all the entrenched bureaucrats hired under Democrat presidents, the one who take their agency's mission seriously. The fact that he's filled his cabinet and national security team with neocon warmongers just like Obama did is, according to the right-wing narrative, because he was under such pressure that he couldn't initiate the dramatic changes he really wants to make. They also see his trade war with China and the expansion of the sanctions regimes against nations that resist U.S. hegemony as evidence of his toughness and leadership. Obviously, the centrist media tells a different story, but if you're a likely Trump voter, you probably don't listen to MSNBC or CNN or subscribe to the New York Times. Will they still see him as an outsider this year? Well, there's no way they will see Biden as an outsider or as someone who's bringing fresh new ideas to Washington. So here are those Michigan voters from 2016 again.
Personally, I think that they need to bring America back to an older value system where we were about us.
I think Donald Trump makes for a good candidate due to the destructive capability of the disease I like to call political correctness. It's caused a lot of arguments, fights, disagreements, and a lot of destruction and decay throughout the entire country.
I also believe that we should build a wall and stop illegal immigration coming across our southern border, along with stopping drugs from coming across, and temporarily stop the immigration of Muslims coming into this country until we can vet them.
Make us feel safe. We need to feel safe in this country. I think there's a great divide between the races. I think there's a terrorist threat, and you can just feel a tension, and that tension needs to be gone. We need to be all Americans.
Anxiety over the rapid changes in society is another major factor. After a study of voters in 2016, University of Pennsylvania political scientist Diana Mutz wrote, quote, "It was about dominant groups that felt threatened by change and a candidate who took advantage of that trend. For the first time since Europeans arrived in this country, white Americans are being told that they will soon be a minority race," end quote. When members of a historically dominant group feel threatened, she explains, they go through some interesting psychological twists and turns to make themselves feel okay again. First, they get nostalgic and try to protect the status quo however they can. They defend their own group. And then they start behaving in more traditional ways, and they start to feel more negatively toward other groups. Now, most people who vote for Democrats would label that as racist, and I wouldn't disagree. But labeling people as ignorant racists is really a very poor way to get their support in an election. In fact, it reinforces their feeling that Democrats are elitists and don't understand their lives. So let's give it a try for a minute. The white working class voter has seen their nation change dramatically from the one they grew up in. Technology, entertainment, and work life have all changed dramatically, and so has the treatment of LGBTQ people, the advent of political correctness, and the long-term failure of the United States government to enact an immigration policy. All add to that feeling that their way of life is changing dramatically. The right-wing media exploit that anxiety for ratings by highlighting the most radical stories they can find. They spend a lot of time on transgender bathroom usage, protests where buildings are burned or stores are looted. They amplify stories about political correctness and cancel culture by using examples that will seem the most extreme and unfair to their audience. They highlight crimes by immigrants and any imagined special treatment given to LGBTQ people, often followed by comments from talking heads that amplify those examples and associate them with the Democratic Party. Well, the Democrats have spent a lot of resources on identity politics. They do support, or at least claim to understand, the motivations of protesters who damage property. They often enforce political correctness, applaud cancel culture, and condemn anyone who disagrees as racist, sexist, or homophobic. The centrist media like CNN and MSNBC repeat those condemnations, find the most egregious possible examples to prove that indeed those people on the right are racist, sexist, and homophobic. And they engage in group shaming. As Matt Taibbi points out in his book, Hate Incorporated, the media, particularly the cable news networks, have discovered that fomenting hate of the other side is good for ratings. So they continue to feed these narratives to their viewers. The Trump people, now shamed as racists and deplorables, see the Democrats as closely associated with the worst examples they have been shown on Fox or heard from talk radio. They see the Democrats as the ones who are threatening their way of life. They are correct that the America they remember, the American dream, is over, but they're led to blame immigrants, people of color, atheists, and gay people for this, while Democrats are led to believe that Trump is the cause of all the nation's problems and getting rid of him will make everything better. We've kind of arrived at a stalemate where each side wants to destroy the other, or at least remove them from power in Washington forever. This year we have the Black Lives Matter protests, which unfortunately have resulted in significant property damage, and often the response by Democrat mayors, as Trump calls them, has been to curtail police violence and reduce the funding for police. In centrist media or progressive alternative media, the property damage is often attributed to criminals who infiltrate the demonstrations, and the stories of police brutality against people of color get a lot of attention. The right-wing media spends a lot of airtime and print space attempting to associate the property damage and the protests with the Democratic Party. They make excuses for police brutality and ignore the blatant racism in law enforcement and criminal justice. They've been so successful that there are even op-ed pieces in the Washington Post claiming that a Biden victory will bring lawlessness and destruction to our streets. So how will these people vote this time? Well, your guess is as good as mine, but I don't see them switching to the Democrats. Let's go back to our Michigan voters of 2016.
I just really like what he says fiscally, and I really like his minimal taxing and the income tax. I think that's great if you're not making $25,000, no income tax, and I'm extremely pro-life, so I really like what he said about protecting religious freedom and liberty.
In Washington, D.C., I know, in fact, you cannot distinguish between the right and the left. because they're all in bed together. It's collusion. K Street, J Street. Money simply passes back and forth between them and enriches them. And I was being a labor union officer for 23 years and came out of the blue collar. We are not doing things to make things better for the working class. And I take a real affront to that, because that's the people that I resonate, connect, I grew up with.
I want to try practicing some protectionism for a change. So, it works for China, works for Russia. It's working for every other country out there, but we don't do it. We're the only country that says protectionism is bad. It'll destroy the economy. It worked through the 19th century. We're the biggest protectionists there were. And I want to see it. I want to see it happen, because it seems to be working for everybody else. We're getting screwed left and right, and we're getting screwed because everybody else is practicing it, and we're not. We're trying to be so generous and take everybody else's goods in, and we're not shipping anything out. The only thing we ship out now is empty containers.
I support Donald Trump because he is supported by so many working class Americans, like the people who work for their money. They work hard for their money, and they don't just want a handout. He also has supporters who, are rich or who are poor, but the working class Americans are his main supporters, and they work hard just like he does. And I think he'll work hard for our country to make America great again.
The economic situation in this country also drives many people to Trump. People know how bad off they are and how precarious their financial situation is, but neither party will tell them the truth about what happened or do anything to fix it. Republicans have coupled the economic rationale for voting for Trump with the anxiety rationale by blaming immigrants and illegal aliens. They also talk about high taxes, too much regulation, trade policy, or the Chinese government, all of which are responsible for this mess, they say. But blaming immigrants and undocumented aliens play into the racism that's already bubbling up, and Trump feeds this misdirected blame by building a wall on the Mexican border, his harsh treatment of migrants seeking asylum, stepped-up deportations, and his trade war with China. Trump can blame China for the virus and for stealing our jobs, although the Chinese are in no way responsible for the virus or the poor response to it by the United States government. The U.S. government allowed American jobs to be exported to China and even gave corporations tax breaks for doing it. The Chinese government's crime was that they allowed those industries to come in and build factories in China and provide jobs for the Chinese people. Finding an external enemy to blame for our ills is a long-standing tradition in Washington. But Trump was right to blame trade policy for some of our economic problems. Deals like NAFTA, the 1979 trade pact with China, the proposed Trans-Pacific Partnership, were all designed to benefit U.S. corporations, not U.S. workers. While Trump has renegotiated these deals with great fanfare, the new deals are not much of an improvement for workers. Trump has also doubled down on some of the neoliberalism that was introduced under Reagan. He's cut taxes, mostly on the wealthy and corporations. He's deregulated as many industries as he could, and he's trying to cut welfare to the bone and trying to destroy what little relief Americans got from Obamacare. What Trump has done is to acknowledge the problems of workers and promise to do something about them. The fact that he was lying is less important to voters than the fact that he actually acknowledged their feelings. Democrats have largely promised a continuation of neoliberal policies, more trade deals, more lax enforcement of immigration laws. In other words, they promise to continue to ignore the people who vote for Trump and continue the policies that gave rise to Trump in the first place. The advent of big money in politics has left the parties with a dilemma. How can they reconcile the needs of working people who vote with those of the billionaires who finance their campaigns? Democrats are trying to be the party of working people, minorities, and women while pursuing the neoliberal economic policies that ship U.S. jobs overseas and exacerbate the poverty and lack of social safety nets that hurts minorities and women the most. They want the votes of workers and the money of bankers and corporations, so they have to deceive one or the other, and they've chosen to deceive voters. As a result, the Democrats are perceived as liars and arrogant elitists that belittle the Trump voters as stupid deplorables. Biden, like Hillary Clinton before him, has told Wall Street bankers and corporate executives that nothing will fundamentally change. To make matters better for Trump, Democrats are anti-racist and pro-gay and pro-abortion, and that's used by the right-wing media to stir up even more hatred toward the Democrats. Republicans, with the help of their media partners, are also in the pocket of the top 1%, but they've convinced their voters that the policies those billionaires want are really the best thing for them. What neither party is willing to acknowledge is that manufacturing is not coming back to the United States. Also, the ability of the U.S. to dominate markets by using its military is fading fast. And no one is willing to discuss drastic cuts in the Pentagon budget to fund social programs, infrastructure, or anything else that could make America greater. Neither party has a plan to rectify the enormous disparities in income and wealth in this country. The Republicans talk about tax cuts, cuts in government services that will make things worse, and the Democrats want job training even though there are no jobs to train for. They talk about tax increases on the wealthy, but it's unlikely they will work hard enough to get those through Congress. A system owned by the 1% is unlikely to undertake a program that will diminish the wealth of the 1%. You're listening to Wider View, a weekly conversation with analysts and activists rarely found in the mainstream media. Wider View is made available free of charge to radio stations nationwide, and a podcast of this show is available on iTunes, Spotify, and Google Play Music as Wider View Radio, and at widerviewradio.podbean.com. You can also follow us on Facebook at Wider View Radio. So where do we go from here? Well, the most cogent analysis of the U.S. political situation that I've read recently is from Godfrey Roberts, a journalist and author of the book China 2020, Everything You Know Is Wrong. Forgive me for this long excerpt, but I think it's really important for us to understand as we have an election soon. And I quote, "Americans are sort of like the baffled participant in a game. Sometimes the onlookers see more of the game than the players. Americans honestly believe that the American system is exceptional, the best in the world. This is an earnest and steadfast faith. They simply cannot bring themselves to doubt or oppose the American system. Since the American system is perfect, once problems arise by the process of elimination, Americans reason that the problem must stem only from having elected the right or wrong politician. In the U.S., challenging and overthrowing the system is taboo. It's simply impossible. This is because the American system is considered sacred, perfect. It's only particular individuals who have problems, and only particular problems that cannot be handled well. The system itself has no problems. Therefore, all actions can only be carried out within the purview of what the system allows. The only path is by election. Use a successful election to construct the starting point and foundations of societal change. The U.S. electoral system is a systemic national form of moral licensing. First, it grants people the right to vote and a few nominal political and civil rights, allowing people to feel they have power and agency and thereby perceive moral satisfaction. Afterward, the politicians and elites can recount the greatness and glory of the system right and proper as it is, saying, "We allow African Americans to go out in the streets, so our system is progressive. We had Obama as president. How can our society be discriminatory against African Americans?" The first stage of American politics is taking the right to express concerns and equating it with measures to resolve the problem. I allowed you to express your opinion, so all is well. The second stage of American politics is taking the right to express concerns and using it as legitimization for tacit allowance of the bad. I allowed you to express your opinion, and I even allowed a black president, so what are you babbling about? As one can see, the separation of powers and the electoral system in the United States has created a perfect cognitive trap. People believe that this system can endlessly empower individuals and provide limitless potential and possibilities, that it can change anything. The system is in fact like a black hole, taking all the potential and sucking it in and dispelling it, even if it means there will be no changes in reality." End quote. Again, that was from an essay by Godfrey Roberts found on the website Vineyard of the Saker. The best we can hope for from an election is minor reforms to the system that might be reversed when the other party comes to power. And we often don't even get that much because Congress is unable to agree on any reform to the tax code or to social programs that would benefit working people. The only things they seem to agree on are increasing the military budget and sending more aid to Israel. What's the use of elections then? There are 100 million eligible voters in this country who simply do not vote, largely because they don't think it will do them any good. I take the position that since I must live in this system, I should participate in the only way I am permitted, and some local and state races are still worth contesting and can yield some change that matters. At the national level, though, I don't have any illusions. In most elections, there's no one on the ballot who represents my point of view or is committed to the kind of systemic change we need to have in this country, except for minor party candidates who have no chance whatever of winning. I think what we need here is a revolution, not reform. We need to break the system or secede from it. And that's our show for this week. If you have comments about this program, please contact me at widerviewradio@gmail.com or on the Facebook page for Wider View Radio. As always, the views expressed on Wider View are those of myself and my guests and may not reflect the views of the management of this radio station. We aim to provoke you to think outside the box and question the narratives you hear from the mainstream media and our national leaders. I hope we have succeeded. I'm your host, Charles Dunaway. Thanks for listening to Wider View.